Hi, I'm Edwin Samuelson. Welcome to the CineFiles, your weekly film fix. Today, as you can see by my hat, we're going to be talking about rock and roll cinema. In fact, I'm wearing the hat of one of my favorite bands who I just happened to see in concert, the Stooges. And in fact, they're going to be, I think, an inspiration to a lot of the bands that we'll be talking about today. But today, our topic is, like I said, rock and roll cinema. And I want to introduce my, my co-host here to my left, Eric Cohen, and Michael Foltz.
Should we say rock and roll cinema, or should we just get to the meat of the matter and say punk rock cinema?
Hey, I'll go with that. Punk rock cinema, which was my favorite music. It's all I listen to, basically. My favorite group, as I mentioned, is the Stooges, which I guess you could say is the first punk rock group, the one that put the seeds for the rest of the punk rock era.
And a little bit of breaking news, although by the time it airs, I'm sure this will be old news. But anybody that's a Stooges fan should be very excited because Nick Gomez will be filming The Passenger very soon with
Elijah Wood.
Our Elijah Wood.
Excellent choice.
I agree. I think he's going to be wonderful.
He's got to bulk up, though, because Iggy is the most muscular man.
I think he's got to I think he's got to be more emaciated.
Well, I got to say, I can't wait. Iggy Pop is my hero. In fact, I jumped on stage with the man twice. The guy is the greatest rock and roll performer. But I don't want to get off topic. This man is amazing, and he influenced many bands. In fact, he influenced the first band we're about to talk about in their movie, which is the Ramones. Joey Ramone and Marky Ramone and all the Ramones have mentioned on the record that the Stooges were one of their favorite bands. In fact, Funhouse was the album they said they played more than any other album. Right. And I would agree because you can hear a lot of their influences in the Ramones music. In fact, the movie we're going to talk about is the entire history of the Ramones, is End of the Century, which is a film that traces the beginnings of the band to the final end of the band's career and the deaths of two of the members at the time. The Ramones, as everyone knows, were a band from Forest Hills, Queens, which is not known for being a real heavy-duty rock and roll era place. But right. The Ramones, I guess you could say, were, as they mentioned in the movie, really makes clear they were tired of the music progressions of the day. In fact, there were very few bands actually making music of note. It was just what it is today, manufactured music. And
they decided to name themselves after Phil Ramone.
They actually came up with it because they. Yes, actually, that is correct. There was when Paul McCartney always said he wanted to go out on the road and play with the Beatles under a different name because he didn't want to be known as the Beatles. He wanted to have a good time, and he came up with the idea of becoming something Ramones. So they all became the Ramones. The Ramones are one of my favorite groups of all time. Also, I think Rocket to Russia, which I know you guys will agree is probably the finest thing they ever did. They influenced more bands than any other.
Rock and Roll Radio was a great album.
Rock and Roll
Radio is a really good album. Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah, it's actually End of the Century.
Yeah, End of the Century.
Rock and Roll, which was actually produced by our favorite mass murderer, Phil Spector.
Not mass murderer. Let's just say favorite lunatic.
I'll go on record on that. Well, let's get into the documentary. The documentary, as I said, traces the beginnings of the Ramones to the end. It interviews all the surviving band members and has many clips, in fact, of the Stooges, of the bands that they were influenced by, such as another one of my favorites, the New York Dolls. Unfortunately, the problem with the movie for me is I didn't think it was really well put together. I thought there was a lot of great information. The Ramones have a great story. I mean, I love that you see where Johnny Ramone and Joey do not speak for 20 years almost because of a woman, but yet they still tour because they have the hopes of making it big, even though the odds are completely not in their favor.
I can't believe you said that this film doesn't tell it well. I think it really got to the heart of what the Ramones were all about. The story showed so much like joy and sadness and disappointment and triumph. I mean, I think the weakness was that some of the archival footage wasn't good, especially those early Ramone club things where they just kept showing Joey on the loop throughout.
Actually, there is a great scene there where I love where it's actually a home video footage, which is probably one of the most priceless moments in the movie, where it's probably one of their first gigs at CBGB's, and they get into a fight where they want what song they want to play. Let's play loud to "Fuck you, I want to play this song." It's a priceless moment. There's some great little bits of archival information. I just don't think the movie's assembled that well.
I love the interview with Joey's brother. I didn't realize that the feud was based on a woman. You know, it was Joey's girlfriend, and then it became Johnny's wife. And I didn't realize Johnny was like such a right-wing prick. you know, and then you saw it, even the little clip of them showing the Ramones accepting their entry into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, where Johnny Ramone personally thanks George W. Bush.
That hurts, doesn't it?
And Dee Dee Ramone thanks himself for being so great.
That's better. That's better.
And it is really, to me, really, this as a longtime Ramones fan, I still can't believe that Marky Ramone was not an original, because he looked like he belonged there from the very beginning.
I just want to like make I don't know if there's any such thing. I mean, it would have to be like a pretty poorly made documentary to say that to determine whether or not this had to be pretty well put together. I think the documentary is very much in the spirit of what the Ramones were all about, and I found the documentary endlessly fascinating. Especially if you're a fan of the music. I just didn't find, you know, and I found like, there are documentaries that they don't tell you enough about something, or it's frustrating if they're going to tell you about this and why don't they show it, you know, they couldn't get the rights to show that, is that why, or they couldn't play music?
I'm going to go on.
The only thing I would say is that I felt was lacking in the film, I wish they told us more about like their experience making Rock and Roll High School. Because that was just kind of just like this throwaway moment, oh, they made this movie for Roger Corman. It's like, I wonder what the story behind that was.
You know what makes me angry too is I'm not trying to brag or anything. I actually saw a rough cut of the film because I was hearing about this film for a long time, and I saw that the director was going to be there, and he actually brought a mini DV tape of the movie before it was even finished, and he actually showed it at the Pioneer Theater. And it was a different edit of the film, and I actually thought it was a better film than the one that got released. Because there's a lot of things that I think that he wanted to show, but he wasn't allowed to. Like, in fact, there's some footage of the Stooges that's actually, not trying to rig on Iggy again, that he wanted to show because it that's what's the word I'm looking at. It makes a point stronger in the movie, but they couldn't show it in this movie. I think he had problems with getting clips, and
that's probably what he probably just couldn't license the stuff.
Yeah, it's expensive. I mean, in fact, it said property of, license from when I saw it. But
there could have been some sort of creative way where he could have made up for that.
There's a lot of.
I still think it's a strong enough film to stand.
But
on I felt I got the whole story. I really did. I didn't know that Joey became like this liberal, raging Democrat towards the end. When they were saying that Joey really found his stride in that, which was Johnny's antithesis, I love that. I thought that was very refreshing.
In fact, I don't know if you're talking about Apollos, I'll just be real quick. Actually, Joey sings on a very political song, which actually pissed off Johnny, which was Sun City.
Sun City, yeah.
Sun City,
or Steve Van Zandt.
Yeah, and actually there's a great story, which I don't believe is really explored in the documentary, which is about a song that Joey Ramone wrote about Ronald Reagan called Bonzo Goes to Pittsburgh, which is a song about Ronald Reagan actually visiting Nazi graves and putting wreaths on them. And of course, Joey, being Jewish, was really offended, and he had every right to be. And Johnny Ramone played the music, and then he didn't know what the song was about, and Joey laid in his vocals, and of course, Johnny was so pissed off. In fact, it was one of their biggest hits, but if you look at the greatest hits now, it says assembled by Johnny Ramone. It is not on there because he is a super diehard conservative.
What I think is funny is just the idea that Johnny Ramone was really for apartheid. He was just mad.
I don't get it. I don't
know how somebody could be for apartheid.
How can you be like the most rebellious band against the system, you know, and be the conservative Republican people? I just don't get it, you know. I mean,
well, it's like you know, the hardcore scene. You have like the straight edge kids.
Yeah, which is the minor threat.
The whole contradiction in that.
But some people just got. I don't know if this was truly Johnny, but Johnny just seemed like an asshole. It's
so funny. He has so many famous celebrity friends who are actually liberal Democrats, like Eddie Vedder is one of his best friends.
I think Nicolas Cage was one of his friends.
But also, Vincent Chicken there. Vincent Gallo was one of his best friends. So go figure. I mean, this guy supposedly has everyone over at his house and had parties, you know, but he comes off as a real asshole in this documentary.
What's strange is he reminds me of a lot of people that I encounter on Staten Island when I work there. Just guys that were like into their neighborhood and just really conservative for really no reason other than just to be an asshole and be conservative. And to me, you know, it seems like that. Whereas Joey, it seemed like followed his heart and followed his idea to be a real activist. And you know something, a year before he died, I got to meet Joey Ramone in the East Village on the street, and I got to shake his hand. So
I was really sad when he died, because you know what's so sad is like the day before he died, I actually went to BAM and I actually saw Rock and Roll High School. I had a blast. It's very sad that he died as he did, because he really was a talent. And in fact, you really should check out his solo album, his only album. It's a really good album. In fact, he covers 1969, a Stooges song, which is really good. And in fact, his music was used in Bowling for Columbine, A Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong.
His death affected a lot of people, a lot more than Johnny's did, even though Johnny, you know, had all these famous friends.
Well, Joey was the first one
But when Joey passed away, I mean, I remember hearing about it on Howard Stern, and they brought Joey on numerous times because he was a friend of the show. And I remember how terribly sad Howard was. And you don't hear that too much in Howard's voice when somebody passes. And he's very sad that Joey died. But I remember having Joey and Johnny on the couch
That was a
together,
great show.
and they refused to look at one another. They refused to address one another, and they refused to look at one another.
That
And
was great.
that was a classic moment.
Another classic moment too is where on Howard. Actually, I wish they could have actually shown that in the movie because that would have given you an idea of their real. That's the only time you really see them. Actually
Well, there's
manage it.
actually a Ramones DVD out there with a bunch
Raw.
of like snippets from different things that they got the rights of.
And actually, it has a commentary by Johnny just before he died. It's
You
called
should
Raw.
see. You should see. Yeah, you should see it maybe as companion pieces at home on DVD.
Well, we'll go on. Let's go on to talk about their film really briefly. The film the Ramones are famous for, which is Rock and Roll High School, which is a Roger Corman film. Hard to believe this, people, but it was actually going to be called Disco High, until the director Alan Arkush, being a rock and roll devotee who actually worked at the Fillmore East, said, "No freaking way, disco is lame." So he begged Roger Corman, and he just considered to make Rock and Roll High School with the
The
Ramones.
Ramones weren't exactly the biggest disco band either.
No, because he said rock and roll is cool, let's go to the Ramones. And Roger Corman saw a comic book that they were in and said, okay, we can do it. The movie, actually, when it came out, didn't do too well. It became a kind of a midnight favorite, went on to influence many people. In fact, Nirvana were hugely influenced by that movie because their video, Smells Like Teen Spirit, actually takes some of the scenes from the movie, basically, with the audience riding in the
Unfortunately,
school.
there was no PJ Souls in Smells Like Teen Spirit.
No, there wasn't. But there's many, many funny movies. In fact, as Alan Arkush, director, has said, he tried to make a Ramones version of Hard Day's Night, and I think he did a very admirable job. In fact, there's many scenes that actually come out of Hard Day's Night. In fact, there's a wonderful dream sequence, or I guess you say hallucination sequence, with PJ Soul smoking pot, and actually I Want to Be Your Boyfriend is played, which actually does have that Hard Day's Night feel.
It's like what's great about the film is like you sit there and you think there's a period that was this sort of condensed late 70s, early 80s period where everyone was trying to do like a rock musical on film. And I don't know who started off. Was it Rocky Horror, or was it like the rock opera movies like Tommy? It's just like suddenly.
I think once Tommy had some sort of success under his belt, everybody got.
Everyone's trying to do that, but it's like, but you had like Rocky Horror also push the midnight movie thing, like, and then you had like in Australia and New Zealand and England, you had all these films coming out. They were kind of like these Starstruck and Return of Captain Invincible, and so it's like it just seems so odd that. Well, let's build a movie around the Ramones. You know what I mean? It's like it's an odd band to choose because they weren't exactly a huge band.
No, they were
by
not.
any stretch of the imagination.
They weren't huge dollar-wise. They were huge with influence because all the underground bands.
They were,
but it's an odd choice.
But
to
at
have
the
as a
same
movie.
time, because of that, because they had I guess what you call street cred at the time. It's still like an odd they
were cheap too.
They weren't like the Bee Gees. They weren't like this like this.
It would be like making a film today, a big budget film about the life of Ian McKay.
Yeah, basically. But it.
Oh yeah. That's
but you're glad they made it because it's a really fun movie. I mean, Mary Warrenoff is in it. She's like
Miss Togar.
She's like a Corman regular. So is what's his name?
Paul Bartel.
Paul Bartel. And Alan Arkush does a good job. I met Alan Arkush.
Oh yeah, he's a really good director because I love that he keeps the film very sweet. It's never mean-spirited. I mean, it's always this humor in it is just so sweet. I mean, there's a scene in there which has me crying every time I see it.
It's not a kinky film,
no,
which is like interesting
because it's a Corman film.
It is
not
a Corman
kinky film.
You know what I love?
No. Corman does go. It goes.
But that's what I'm saying.
It's a PG movie, which is rare.
It's like a total PG film.
There's a great scene where they actually show the effects of rock and roll on a guinea pig, and they play teenage lobotomy, and the rat explodes, which is I always has me crying. It's hysterical. There's many great scenes. In fact, I love the way that the Ramones could not act. I love them. There's a scene where they said they had to take 30 takes of Dee Dee saying, "Whoa, pizza." It's obvious the guy is on every single drug known to man, but that actually only adds to its charm, I think. What is do you have a favorite set piece in the film, guys? I mean, like a favorite musical number?
No. I
No?
haven't seen it for a
I
long
love the
time.
opening. I love the opening where you see the Ramones introduced in the car. Now I want to have something to do. You know, when they're eating, Joey's eating chicken and driving the car that has
I have to see that again.
Yeah, I have to see it
Because
again,
nothing
too.
really stands out for me.
Well, also we're going to mention it's a great soundtrack. It has a lot of Ramones songs as well as other songs by other bands. In fact, Paul McCartney and the Wings, I don't know how they got it. Brian Eno is on there. Very good song. And in fact, definitely check out those reissues of the first few albums for the Ramones too. They're terrific. In fact, I think they're some of the best reissues of rock and roll music ever. In fact, every album has about 10 bonus tracks on there.
Well, you know, the Ramones were like America's punk rock godfathers.
Yeah.
But then across the pond, you had the other great wave of punk rock and its influence, and the Godfathers, otherwise known as the Sex Pistols.
Which I will go on record were at one time my favorite band of all time. I was so obsessed with the Sex Pistols. I was obsessed. I mean, I loved the Sex Pistols. In fact, I saw them twice in concert. I saw them in '96, and I saw them in 2002, which was not very memorable. The Sex Pistols, to me, are one of the most fun bands. In fact, you talk about comic book bands, they're the ultimate comic book creation. In fact, I will go on record, Nevermind the Bollocks is one of my favorite albums of all time. And in fact, The Great Rock and Roll Swindle documents the rise and
Why
fall.
don't we introduce that now?
Well,
Tell the audience about this film.
Well, The Great Rock and Roll Swindle actually has the disadvantage of being made after the Sex Pistols were broken up. Johnny Rotten left the group, and the group was in shambles.
But I think the way that is told within the film, though, is very interesting.
Well, it's not really a documentary.
It's more of a, I guess it's really hard to describe what kind of film it is. It's not really
I think
a documentary.
it was intended to be.
It's a musical slash documentary.
What's his name? What's his name? The manager of the
Malcolm
Sex Pistols.
McLaren.
Malcolm McLaren's attempt to make A Hard Day's Night for the Sex Pistols. It's his attempt to produce something like that.
I think what Malcolm McLaren
And it turned into something
saying,
else, what with the death of Sid Vicious and all that.
What he's saying in this film, and I don't really believe him at the end or what he's trying to say through, but the manager of the Sex Pistols, who came up with the idea of the Sex Pistols in the first place, and say, no matter what happens with this band, my idea, my concept will always be bigger than the band itself. This was just a media pop experiment on my part, and we did it. That was what the Sex Pistols were about. The name of this film, The Great Rock and Roll Swindle. That's what it was supposed to be. Except little did he know that the band would evolve into something that was just so much bigger than a little pop experiment and had so much influence, and it really directly affected people's lives. But it's like, to me, the film was like a fever dream. It's amazing, different ways that it goes and where it's coming from. The music is absolutely fantastic. The soundtrack of The Great Rock and Roll Swindle is probably my favorite rock and roll soundtrack of all time. The music is great, and it's the only time Sid Vicious has really sounded good is on this soundtrack.
Well, actually, believe it or not, Sid Vicious is actually, that's the only album they actually played on, because he would never even play on the first album because he was terrible. So they actually got the original bass player, Glenn Matlock, to come back and actually play on the album.
Well, with Great Rock and Roll Swindle, though, it's like it's a
cut and paste job.
It's a cut and paste. Well, I mean, it's an entertaining film. If you're a Sex Pistols fan, it's definitely a good Sex Pistols movie. That's basically what the Sex Pistols are about. But it's a staged movie. You know, it's like a lot of the stuff in there was directed and conceived for that film, and they just have the Sex Pistols do their thing while they shoot it. It's not really a documentary.
No, it's more like, I guess you could say it's a music video before MTV with actual skits and musical numbers.
Right.
To me, it's a...
what's his name? Directed it.
Julian Temple,
Julian
who
Temple.
actually later on makes
Directed
a
the film,
response to this film, which we'll get into in a minute. But the problem with The Rock and Roll Swindle, which I do love the movie, in fact, as I said, it has some of the most memorable scenes in rock and roll cinema, which is Sid Vicious singing My Way.
And shooting at the audience?
Shooting is actually the audience. I believe the person
which
who shot
was
is his mother.
Which was redone by Alex Cox.
For Sid and Nancy.
Sid and Nancy.
Which is actually one we should talk about, actually. There's some many terrific scenes. In fact, look very carefully for a cameo by Nancy Spungen when Sid Vicious is actually in his underwear singing. And the problem is, though, is Malcolm McLaren. He actually inserts himself into the film too often, and he tries to upstage the actual Sex Pistols. I wasn't so interested in Malcolm McLaren. I'm more interested in the Sex Pistols. However, like I said, the animation sequences with Silly Thing are phenomenal. And in fact, my favorite Sex Pistols song gets a great musical montage, which is Bodies, which is a terrific piece. Now, Mike,
my two favorite musical numbers in it was the tryout, which is really ballsy to invite Johnny Rotten's brother to the tryout for the title song, Great Rock and Roll
looks
Swindle.
just like him too.
To bring him and then have all these other guys and then have this song cut together with all these guys trying out, and half these guys are just terrible. Although one of the guys was so successful in the tryout, they had him do the song "Who Killed Bambi," which I know you're a big fan of.
I'm not a big fan of the singer though. Tenfold tutor.
Yeah, he's a very strange fellow. And then one of my favorite songs of all time, "Friggin' and the Riggin'," they do that with an animated sequence at the end with Steve Jones as the detective, the noir detective, having sex in the movie theater by himself with this good-looking woman or prostitute or whatever you'd call her. But that's great. And then just having, during the song of the Great Rock and Roll Swindle, while they're having everybody try out, you have that midget, that little woman midget, who's like bizarre. Assembling like this. She's like Malcolm McLaren's like Tinkerbell, I guess. And she's assembling the Great Rock and Roll Swindle block letters. And she's very bizarre in her dancing around. And it's a very, and also my favorite part of the film is just for no reason going down to Brazil, meeting the great thief, British thief, who's actually a real thief, Ronnie Biggs.
Right.
One of the most notorious criminals actually in British history. And in fact, he was just actually extradited. He actually gave himself up because he was dying and went back to England. But actually, even Johnny Rotten has gone on record said he thinks that was a low for Sex Pistols because this man has actually killed 2 innocent people. But they make it into a very big musical number with Martin Bormann.
Yeah, an actor playing Martin Bormann.
Well, supposedly Martin Bormann as the bass player.
Yeah, supposedly Martin Bormann runs away to Brazil. Very famous Nazi, runs away to Brazil. They find him to be the bassist for the Sex Pistols. And Ronnie Biggs, this British criminal, I think he robbed trains.
He robbed a train and killed 2 people, innocent people. And Johnny Rotten said these were working class people. And he had every right to be pissed. He said, I don't want my name associated with that.
Well, he was pissed.
He did get ripped off.
He got a real raw deal from Malcolm.
They all did. And the problem with the Sex Pistols,
even Steve Jones, who stuck with him to the end.
Yeah, he said he regrets it. One of the biggest regrets of his life. In fact, let's get to the follow-up film.
Transition.
Let's get to the follow-up film, which is actually the Sex Pistols' response to the Great Rock and Roll Swindle, because this was actually made with their cooperation 100%, and that is the Filth and the Fury, which is based on a very famous newspaper headline of the 1970s when the Sex Pistols were on a television show called Tomorrow and actually cursed out the actual interviewer, who was a drunken idiot.
You dirty fucker. That's what Steve Jones
fucking
calls
rata.
You
dirty old man.
But it's interesting that this film came almost 20 years after the fact, too. It was like a 20-year-in-waiting answer to the Great Rock and Roll Swindle and Malcolm McLaren.
I think it did a terrific job of telling the Sex Pistols' history and explaining how the Sex Pistols began more so than the Great Rock and Roll
Swindle. And it was a true documentary.
And I thought it was a great capsule on what the scene was at the time. There's a phenomenal piece of footage in that film. You don't find out till later where everybody was in this one club at one time. Just happened to be this coincidence that you have in there Billy Idol. You have in there Johnny Rotten. You have in there Susie Sue. You have Shane McGowan, and the person taking the footage was Adam Ant. And you don't find this until later in the credits. You're like, holy shit.
Yeah, and it was
amazing. An amazing record.
But the strength of the Filth and the Fury wasn't that it was the Sex Pistols' answer and a big, right to Malcolm McLaren there, and an answer to the Great Rock and Roll Swindle, and how that these were real lives that were in this moment. But it's not only, but it captured the zeitgeist of London at the time and how the turbulent times. I mean, they had that little sequence of this old man climbs out of his basement window for no reason to run over to the TV camera and to point at his black neighbors and go, "You're the reason why all these problems. It's your fault." Just like no reason, but it is, and then it shows the garbage strike that was taking place.
That's why I love it. That movie shows how the
moment in history.
That's how the Sex Pistols started, because of the shit world that this Margaret Thatcher woman.
Well, it was pre-Thatcher.
Well, I mean that political party, how they destroyed London, and with the Borstals, which actually, well, I don't want to get off the subject, but there's a movie called Scum, which actually explains how the society and the government in London at the time was horrible. It was a horrible place to live at the time. And that's why people were rebelling, and that's how the Sex Pistols started. And also, Johnny Rotten says something I have never forgotten this. He goes, "You don't fucking create me." And that's what was response to Malcolm McLaren saying that he created.
And it's interesting how this film handles McLaren as well. Like, you never see him. He's
No.
they interview someone who claims to be Malcolm McLaren, but he's in a leather S&M mask. Anytime they're, like,
Which
questioning him.
is a take on his introduction in the Great Rock and Roll Swindle, where he's wearing the S&M mask.
There's footage of the actual the Sex Pistols playing at a children's party, you know, like a benefit where they're throwing cake with the children, which is wonderful. I mean, it was very. You could see that Sex Pistols were actually that was the happiest you've
This
ever
is a
seen.
film actually I want to own.
It's a great
I own
film.
it.
Disc.
I own it.
I
And there's
think I
a
wanna have
great
copy.
outtake sequence from the Great Rock and Roll Swindle where they pick up the police, the actual reunited police, who you guys know from Sting, and Sting actually rapes Paul Cook, the drummer for the Sex Pistols. It's a great piece of outtake.
They don't show it, but it's insinuated.
And there's a great scene where he goes, "God save the Queen," you know, like, you know, the double.
And it also talks about after the Great Rock and Roll Swindle and after Johnny Rotten left the Pistols, how much shit he got on the streets and how many times he was beaten up.
Well, he almost got killed. He was stabbed in the hand, and he said he could never really play guitar if he really wanted to because he can't make a fist really well.
Yeah.
And
it's all done, and you get to hear that story because it's all retold through the animation, you know, with guys confronting him.
And that's in the Great Rock and Roll Swindle. The one thing too is I love the way they interview the Sex Pistols where they're in silhouette, and they you know, you never really see what they look like today. You always remember what they look like. And there's a very wonderful moment, which actually made me tear up a little bit, was where Johnny Rotten actually cries about Sid Vicious saying he was
killed my friend.
He killed my friend, those bastards. And actually,
Killed my friend, Julian.
there's a scene too where you see Sid Vicious' last interview. It's an interview I've never seen before, where you can tell he's just like, I don't give a shit anymore. I don't care.
Well, that was shortly after Nancy Spongeon's
And that's like the
accidental
first time
death.
I've ever seen this. And it was a very well-made movie. And in fact, if you're a Sex Pistols fan,
If
it's
you're a
must.
fan of documentary
If you're a
or
fan
music,
of rock on film, rock in general, I mean, you know, there's history.
Yeah, it's one of the most important
and
parts of
understanding
history.
who the Sex Pistols were and where they were coming from and how that just influenced.
Actually, there is one scene in there that I actually loved. They had an interview with Mark Bolan, T-Rex here, everybody.
That's a great one.
Give his commentary on the Sex Pistols, and that was right before Mark Bolan's death, actually.
Yeah, he hated. He didn't really care for the Sex Pistols, and they didn't.
No,
like
no,
him.
he was actually intrigued by them. He was actually intrigued by them. He kept a very open mind. But yeah, and it shows a young Ricky Jay going to be on a talk show. That was very, very strange because they had that little TV
Oh, that's right.
talk show
Oh, I forgot about the
montage
Ricky Jay
and Ricky
part.
Jay. So just picture a young Ricky Jay with really
Long
long
hair.
hair.
That will bring this show
Really
to a
well.
close. We got to wrap it up, but those are 4 great movies. Then the movies again we saw were The End of the Century, Rock and Roll High School, the Great Rock and Roll Swindle, and of course the best of all the movies, which I'm going to go on record, I think is The Filth and the Fury. Very emotional. It's a must-see by everyone a fan of rock and roll in general. But that's the best one, and we hope you'll check it out.
And stay tuned for future shows because we will be so uninspired to come up with new topics that we will always fall back on rock and roll cinema.
We've been trying to do this for 2 years, you know. That was always our backup show. So here it is for you. Anyway, till next week, thank you very much for tuning in. Yeah, I love the Great Rock and Roll Swindle. We could
talk about we could talk about the film. Have you seen DOA?
Oh, I got it on DVD.
Okay, because I mean, you talk about a whole era of punk. I mean,
I saw it in the theater.
You got to see American Hardcore.
This isn't
great.
really a rock film, but it falls into that category. Smithereens. Have you seen that?
You know what's so funny? I have a copy of it. I never got to watch it because I'm a huge Richard Hell fan. I think.
It's fascinating film.
You mean the Susan Seidelman film?
Yeah, it's kind of like it's a good
saw that in film
companion
class.
piece to see that with the end of the century because you really get a sense of that period of time in this film.
I got to see it. I'm going to see it.
It's a wrap.
Thank you.
Should we say rock and roll cinema, or should we just get to the meat of the matter and say punk rock cinema?
All right, I'll go with that. Punk rock cinema, which was my favorite music. It's all I listen to, basically. My favorite group, as I mentioned, is the Stooges, which I guess you could say is the first punk rock group, the one that put the seeds for the rest of the punk rock era.
And a little bit of breaking news, although by the time it airs, I'm sure this will be old news. But anybody that's a Stooges fan should be very excited because Nick Gomez will be filming The Passenger very soon with
Elijah Wood.
Our Elijah Wood.
Excellent choice.
I agree. I think he's going to be wonderful.
He's got to bulk up though, because Iggy is the most muscular man.
I think he's got to I think he's got to be more emaciated.
Well, I gotta say, I can't wait. Iggy Pop is my hero. In fact, I jumped on stage with the man twice. The guy is the greatest rock and roll performer. But I don't want to get off topic. This man is amazing, and he influenced many bands. In fact, he influenced the first band we're about to talk about in their movie, which is the Ramones. Joey Ramone and Marky Ramone and all the Ramones have Hi, I'm Edwin Samuelson, and welcome to the CineFiles, your weekly film fix. Today, as you can see by my hat, we're going to be talking about rock and roll cinema. In fact, I'm wearing the hat of one of my favorite bands who I just happened to see in concert, the Stooges. And in fact, they're going to be, I think, an inspiration to a lot of the bands that we'll be talking about today. But today, our topic is, like I said, rock and roll cinema. And I want to introduce my co-hosts here to my left, Eric Cohen and Michael Foe. Mentioned on the record that the Stooges were one of their favorite bands. In fact, Funhouse was the album they said they played more than any other album. Right. And I would agree, because you can hear a lot of their influences in the Ramones music. In fact, the movie we're going to talk about is the entire history of the Ramones, is End of the Century, which is a film that traces the beginnings of the band to the final end of the band's career and the deaths of two of the members at the time. The Ramones, as everyone knows, were a band from Forest Hills, Queens, which is not known for being a real heavy-duty rock and roll era place. But right. The Ramones, I guess you could say, were, as they mentioned in the movie, really makes clear they were tired of the music progressions of the day. In fact, there were very few bands actually making music of note. It was just what it is today, manufactured music.
And they decided to name themselves after Phil Ramone.
They actually came up with it because they. Yes, actually, that is correct. There was when Paul McCartney always said he wanted to go out on the sea where Johnny Ramone and Joey do not speak for 20 years almost because of a woman, but yet they still tour because they have the hopes of making it big, even though the odds are completely not in their favor.
I can't believe you said that this film doesn't tell it well. I think it really got to the heart of what the Ramones were all about. The story showed so much like joy and sadness and disappointment and triumph. I mean, I think the weakness was that some of the archival footage wasn't good, especially those early Ramone club things where they just kept showing Joey on the loop throughout.
Actually, there is a great scene there where it's actually a home video footage, which is probably one of the most priceless moments in the movie, where it's probably one of their first gigs at CBGB's, and they get into a fight where what song they want to play. Let's play loud enough. Fuck you, I want to play this song. It's a priceless moment. There's some great little bits of archival information. I just don't think the movie's assembled that well.
I love the interview with Joey's brother. I didn't realize that the feud was based
the road and play with the Beatles under a different name because he didn't want to be known as the Beatles. He wanted to have a good time, and he came up with the idea of becoming something Ramones, so they all became the Ramones. The Ramones are one of my favorite groups of all time. Also, I think Rocket to Russia, which I know you guys will agree is probably the finest thing they ever did. They influenced more bands than any other.
Rock and Roll Radio was a great album.
Rock and Roll Radio is a really good album, yeah.
Well, yeah, it's actually End of the Century.
Yeah, End of the Century.
The rock and roll, which was actually produced by our favorite mass murderer, Phil Spector.
Not mass murderer. Let's just say favorite lunatic.
I'll go on record on that. Well, let's get into the documentary. The documentary, as I said, traces the beginnings of the Ramones to the end. It interviews all the surviving band members and has many clips, in fact, of the Stooges, of the bands that they were influenced by, such as another one of my favorites, the New York Dolls. Unfortunately, the problem with the movie for me is I didn't think it was really well put together. I thought there was a lot of great information. The Ramones have a great story. I mean, I love that